Disney's The Prince and the Pauper. Once upon a time, there was a good and kindly king. He ruled his country with fairness and generosity. But one day the king became very ill and could no longer watch over his kingdom. His son, the prince, stayed by his father's bedside. Worrying, the greedy captain of the guards saw this as his chance to rob the king's loyal subjects. Since the king was too ill to protect them, day after day the captain and his soldiers filled up the palace with mountains of gold. Nobody could save the kingdom from the thieving captain until two peasants wandered near the palace looking for food. One of the paupers, Mickey, looked exactly like Prince. Of course, he didn't have fine clothes to wear or live in a fancy palace, but he did have two loyal friends. One was rather silly fella called Goofy, and the other was a friendly dog named Pluto. Mickey and Goofy watched as the captain of the guards sped by in a royal coach filled with food. Pluto was so hungry that he chased the coach towards the palace. "Stop!" Mickey shouted. "Come back!" And he ran after his dog. When Mickey got to the palace, a guard waved him in and called him Your Majesty. Meanwhile, inside the palace, the real prince was sitting through another boring lesson with Professor Horace. To amuse himself, he took out his pea shooter and aimed it at his servant, Donald. A little later, there was a loud crash in the hallway. The prince and the pauper had each hidden in a suit of armor. When they went tottering down the hallway, they crashed into each other. Lifting their helmets, the two stared and stared. The prince talked Mickey into changing places. He headed out of the palace. The prince made it past the royal guards, but he couldn't fool Mickey's dog Pluto. When Goofy saw the prince, he was sure it was Mickey and struck up a conversation. The prince said hello and ran off. Back at the palace, Donald brought food to Mickey's room. Mickey reached out for a turkey's leg, but Donald grabbed it first. "I'm checking for poison," he said, biting into a juicy drumstick. Pretty soon, Donald had eaten all the food. Poor Mickey didn't even get a bite. Next, it was time for the royal lesson. Mickey did not fare well at the falconry on horseback riding, but the prince wasn't doing any better. He had tried to go sledding with the peasants. The prince headed for the marketplace where he saw the captain of the guards stealing food from the poor people. He ordered the captain to stop, but the captain just looked at the raggedy peasant and laughed. A few minutes later, the town crier came through the square with news that the king had died. "I must go to my palace right away," the prince said. "I will miss my father greatly, but now it is my duty to take over as king." "Gosh," said Goofy, "you're the prince? I thought you were my buddy Mickey." "I am your friend from now on," vowed the prince, rushing off to the palace. The captain of the guards was waiting for His Royal Highness. As soon as the prince got back to the palace, he would throw him into the dungeon. "I see your royal ring," the captain said, "but it won't do you any good." As soon as the pauper is crowned king, I shall unmask him as an impostor and rule the kingdom myself. But the prince was not alone in the dungeon. Donald was there too. Soon a strange-looking guard came to unlock the dungeon door. It was Goofy. He let the prince out just in time for the coronation. Meanwhile, Mickey was stalling and trying to avoid being crowned king. "Please don't put it on my head," Mickey begged. "He is not the prince," yelled the wicked captain. "He is an impostor. Seize him." "But I'm not an impostor," came a voice from the high balcony. It was the real prince. There was a huge fight, and Mickey and the prince and their friends trapped the captain of the guards and his soldiers. Finally, the prince was crowned king. His first act was to arrest the captain and his men. Now that the kingdom was once again in kind and caring hands, Mickey was happily reunited with his friends and his faithful pup, and the new king was content. The end.